Hello and welcome to the Beauty Way. And today we have Dr. Sally Rundle joining us, and we're excited because our intention for this podcast was to have a bit of fun because we both think that Sally is just such a fun person. And so that's the direction we're heading in today, is to have some fun together. And we're going to be, I feel as though we're going to be talking about creative leadership. So we'll see where that takes us. And before I begin, I wanted to just give a little bit of introduction to Sally for those people who are listening. And I've just been checking out Sal's website. And what I love is she's written a beautiful book, she's written a couple of books actually, but the book More Energy, it's called More Energy, isn't it? More Energy, More You. And when she talking about the author, and it says, known for her sensitivity and skill in inspiring people to connect more with their heart, mind, and spirit. Sally is a thought leader in intuition, energy medicine, and contemporary well-being practice. She's a coach and a mentor, and she educates and inspires people to discover their natural gifts, talents, and strengths. And she helps to empower and transform both individuals and organizations. And in her bio, it says Sally has great curiosity for the latest developments in mindfulness, energy medicine, energy psychology, healing, relationship dynamics, and metaphysics. And she also has a tab on her website that is about dynamic leadership. And I was reflecting because it's one of the words that I've always thought about you, Sally, is that you're so incredibly dynamic. And I feel as though this dynamism and the skills that you bring into the corporate world is such a gift. And, you know, I was also reading on your website that you're a scholar of the Heart Math Institute, which is so profound really in being able to share with leaders these kind of modalities, and particularly in energy medicine. So I'd love it if you were just able to share a little bit with us about today, about what got you started in being a coach and mentor of leadership in the corporate space.
Oh, that's a great question. When I was in my 30s, God, that's a long time ago. I was very cognitive. You know, that's the time I did my PhD, and I was involved in working with organizations in Asia and a lot of strategy stuff. And then I'd started meditating when I was 21 and doing Tai Chi, and I'd trained as a beauty therapist. One of my mum's best friends, she started the first beauty therapy school in Australia, and so I was doing psychology, and Mum said, "Would you like to go and learn with Jan?" And I went, "Oh yeah, that'd be fantastic." So I learned about nutrition and massage and facials, and while I was at uni, and then I took a year off and worked with her full time, and that's when I learned about wholeness and body, mind, spirit, and like all of that. So I was really into it. But the more I got into my late 20s and 30s, and I worked with these super brain men, I mean, like computers on with a head, I lost that. And I went very much into my head. And that's, I mean, you kind of need that to get a PhD anyway. But by the end of my 30s, three things kind of happened at the same time, which really knocked me big time. So my dad died so suddenly. I finished my PhD, which was a dream, and it was kind of like, well, what next? And my marriage ended. And it was kind of like these three endings in a row. And I'd naturally, as I said in my book, run off my verve. You know, I had lots of it. It was like, yeah. And then I just couldn't pick myself up. And I lost my mojo, and I thought, what the hell's happened to me? And looking back, also then, coming to early 40s, I was in perimenopause. I didn't know any of that, but it was all like this storm. And that took me down the path of energy medicine. A friend rang me and she said, I've just had this great reading with this woman in Sedona. Her name's Wanda, and I think she'd be great for you, Sal. Why don't you have a reading? And that's kind of how it rolls with me. It's kind of people. I just felt, yeah, okay. So there was Wanda in Sedona. we're on the phone. Back then there was no Zoom or anything, and she's reading my energy, and I was saying, how are you doing that? And she went, well, it's like you're in my office, you're a hologram. I went, a hologram? She said, yes, a hologram. I went, right, wow. And she said, I've got my hand in your field and I'm feeling everything. And I went, wow, that's cool. And she said, well, if you want to learn, you're actually a medical intuitive. I know you are. Come over and I'll teach you. So I remember walking out of the office and I said to my partner at the time, I said, hey, Gaz, I'm going to Sedona to study medical intuition with Wanda. And I went, where's Sedona? Where is it? So that was the beginning. I got on the plane and off I went to Sedona and had this amazing week with Wanda and learned all this stuff. And then I was in the Whole Foods supermarket and people would sit around just talking about ETs and things like that. I'd be like, what? Awakening. And I saw this poster and it said energy medicine free event with Donna Eden. And I thought, what's energy medicine? And I thought, I'm going to go. So I think part of my thing is my curiosity. And I think that is inherent to creative leadership. So I followed that, and Donna stood up on stage on a Friday night in the Creative Life Centre in Sedona and went, hi, I'm Donna. And I went, oh my God, I love you. And I signed up. And I thought, I just love this woman. And then I went back and I did 6 days with her. And then I thought, and then my world was unfolding and I found heart maths and I found mindfulness and then I found energy medicine university and I went and studied. And that's when I found another teacher. So, it was just this path of kind of following I would say the crystals that now I know my higher self and my guides were just popping these, things in front of me and I go, oh, what's that? Oh, I think I'll go there. And it was profound and it changed everything. It changed everything. And then I combined kind of my cognitive and my energy medicine together because I'm a scientist and I'm a geek. So I love stuff that really works and I'm open to, exploring the unknown. So yeah, that's kind of how I got to where I am today. And it's still happening. It's still happening. Yeah. We're like, found the two of you. Oh my goodness. Like, yes.
Amazing. One thing that just came to me when you were talking then was, about those 3 things that happened to you being in that place. And it reminded me of a quote that I've heard. Maybe it was by Jung or something. And it says something like, don't you know that the path to enlightenment or expansion comes in the absence of intention? And I found that so profound the first time I heard it, because I was like, well, don't you, when you're following your path, don't you need to have an intention? But really what to me, you've just actually talked about that particular quote in the sense of everything fell apart. And I remember hearing Carolyn Mace once tell a story about somebody where something similar had happened. And this guy's life had completely fallen apart. And she said that when he realized, he was like, only God could have orchestrated such a divine, chaotic mess in my life that I needed to just completely collapse and dissolve in order to open to the next thing. Because it sounds as though the path that you then went on was like completely different to where you had been previously.
Totally. Yeah, I ran off I couldn't use what I'd used before to keep living that way. I just couldn't. And even it was called Sunday Sad. So I'd get to Sunday and I'd sit down and I'd start to cry. I'd just be like, there was just too much now. And we know so much more about trauma and all of that. And also, I wasn't in touch with my body, really. I wasn't really in touch with my emotional self because I'd run off this, head for a long time, but it was all there, and it just had to. It was moving and shifting in a big.
Mm.
Yes, yes, and following it, it stopped me in my tracks, definitely, and it gave me a lot more compassion for the people I work with. You know, life's a journey, isn't it? And it's like how we ride it. I remember Dr. Mike? Oh, not he's not a doctor, but he feels like one. Michael Singer. I love him, and the Untethered Soul. And I was listening to him on a podcast the other day, and he was saying, you know, life has its highs and its lows, but we come here as spiritual beings to see, can you handle it? Can you handle it? And that ability for us to handle it, and then that's what I love helping people with, helping them to be able to handle it.
So awesome hearing more about your story, Sally. It's like, you know, we're connected in different ways, and I feel like there's lots of things that I don't know about you, and to hear these stories is really beautiful. And I'm really curious about how you weave, like when working in a corporate space with corporate individuals, how are you weaving the energetic and the metaphysical and the kind of more trauma-informed pieces into your leadership facilitation?
That's such a lovely question. Brought to mind, I worked for a long time for a national or international law firm, and they would set me up in a room on their very fancy reception area, which I loved. I had a great view, and people would come to me, right? You know, so there would be a whole week. But when I'd set up the space. So I'd set up the energetic space when I got in there, and I would have my Australian bushflower sprays. I would also have the oils on the table. I'd have cards, right? And people could smell me. They knew I was in the building because they smell, right? And then they would come in, and I'd say, and it was kind of like, well, welcome to this magic space. You know, come in, sit down. But before they would come in, I would set it up. I would affirm my spirit, their spirit, my guides, their guides, the divine. I would set the space up, and I would ask that this would be a beautiful, safe space for them to learn. And people would come in and just feel so safe and nurtured and loved and supported, that all sorts of things would come out. Like, I can't believe I'm asking this, or I can't believe I'm telling you this. It's like, it's okay, it's good. And then, you know, when I was doing my mediumship course, like, all of a sudden grandparents are showing up behind clients, or I'd hear a voice. And so I'm careful. I watch where people are on their consciousness journey, and I meet them just a little bit beyond. And sometimes intuitively, I would just know this person is ready for this, and I would just go with it. Like one beautiful person. I'd only met her. She just came in for the first time. As soon as she walked through the door, I thought, oh my God, I love you. I just love you so much. Please sit down. And then I heard this voice, and I saw these really like old farmer hands and this gravelly voice. And I said to her, is your grandfather on the other side? And she went, yes. I said, did he have like a really husky, gruffly voice? Yes. Was he a farmer? Yes. Okay, this is going to sound weird, really weird. And he's here. And she just started to cry, and it was just, but I'm mindful. I'm mindful where people are at. And the more I get into the more I grow, the more risks I've taken inside corporate, but also the consciousness is shifting, and particularly with women. They'll just, oh, you've got candles burning. I've got a candle in my office, and I've just done my cards, and oh, I really, you know, like, how do you do your intuition? And so it's happening more, and it's really exciting, because it's like I've been waiting a long time.
Yeah, I love that.
Come on, right?
And so if you're like, you know, bringing those pieces through for somebody, and you're tapping in and intuitively connecting, how is that supporting them specifically in their leadership?
It's a really good question. I think the main thing is I suppose the starting point is I work to help people really develop their emotional intelligence. So that's self-awareness and self-regulation is kind of a foundational piece. And with that comes mindfulness, the heart mass, energy management. All of that is kind of building blocks for me. So then the more intuitive, psychic, metaphysical depends on like where they are on their journey. But I think for leaders, foundational stuff these days is really this sense of, can they lead themselves? Can they? And that requires a lot of self-awareness and the ability to self-regulate in very turbulent, changing times. And everybody's different for how that works for them. But if they don't manage their minds and they're not managing their emotional selves, they'll just be too knocked around. And there's enough research and science to say this is absolutely essential. Like if you want to stay open as a leader and curious and adaptable and create safe spaces for your teams, which is why you're there, you have to manage your own state and be. So that's kind of where I start. And then depending on where they're at, then I add other aspects in. A lot of them are now saying, how do I use my intuition? How do I understand my psychic gifts? But they've got to have this other stuff in place. Otherwise, spiritual bypassing, it's kind of like, no, you need to do this as well.
So interesting. I had a conversation recently with somebody who wants to work with leaders, or does to some degree, in corporate. And the conversation that we were having was how this generation of leaders, which are probably between their 30s and 60s-ish, and how the next generation that's coming up is forcing them into more emotional capacity, because they can't lead their teams if they haven't done the work, because the generation that's coming up are interacting and co-creating in such different ways that they can't lead the way that they used to lead. That really like masculine dominant leadership no longer kind of works in the corporate space like it always has, as long as we can remember. And so I find it really interesting that you're bringing in these emotional aspects, because to me, it makes perfect sense. And I don't work in the corporate space, and I haven't for a really long time. I haven't worked in corporate since 2016, I think. And even then it wasn't really corporate. I worked in the travel industry. So it was it wasn't particularly corporate, because everybody in that industry is really like not corporate. But that was the closest thing that I'd experienced to it. And so I love that this is how you're weaving it in, because, to me, that feels like really important. And what this conversation that I was having with this woman, we were talking about how they're going to lose their leadership positions, lose any form of control over their teams and support of their teams, if they can't upgrade their emotional intelligence, because they simply cannot meet their teams, because typically their teams are maybe a younger generation. They cannot meet them. Are you noticing that in the space?
Yeah, definitely. There's that. You need to be tech savvy, like really tech savvy, and the speed of AI and the technology that's creating these huge waves of change, and emotionally intelligent, because it's about creating that psychological safety for your team so they can be creative. So the holding the space and the container, and that comes down to their ability to have humility, not mindfulness, emotional intelligence, openness, being able to ask great questions, say they don't know, be vulnerable, all the things that the old hierarchy would not do. It's all shifted quickly. And I think for women, a lot of women find this is like liberating. Oh, we can bring our hearts, and we can bring our love, and we can bring our engagement, and all the things that we just inherently know so well. Oh, thank God, this is valued, and this is really important. There was a really big study that Google did about, it was probably about 4 or 5 years ago now. They had 180 teams globally, and they wanted to know what really bodes for success, like why are teams high performing? And they really thought it was going to be about, because of the individuals in the team and their smarts. But what they found was the number one factor was psychological safety. Do I feel safe? Can I just put an idea forward? Can I share how I'm feeling? If I make a mistake, is it going to be all right? That was like that was a game changer. So then how do we create psychological safe spaces for people? Emotional intelligence and all the other aspects that, you know, we've been talking about. Yeah, I love it. It's great. It's like, we've been waiting a long time.
Do you clearly you've been, I think from what you've said, you've been doing this work in the corporate space for around 20 years. Would I be right in that, Sal?
Yeah, probably 30 actually. Close to
Right.
30. I know.
Have
Do
you
I sound really old? I sound really I know.
You're not really old. Have you noticed a big shift? And so that's the first question is, have you noticed a big shift in the leaders? And is there this level of awareness when people first come to you of the requirement to up their level of self-awareness to engage their teams more effectively? Is the second question.
I have noticed a shift. I think it was very masculine, you know, like we predominantly, I remember when I first started, I went into the boardroom of Coles Myer, right? And back then, they were barons, you know, the head of Myers and head of Coles and head of Target. And I was with my boss at the time and mentor, and he kind of hid my body. Like I was sitting, but the room couldn't really see me. I was the only woman in there, and I was also the youngest by a lot. But it was that sense of, you know, we're the barons of industry, and so having a woman in the boardroom, let alone having diversity in the boardroom. So when I did my work in Asia, so really in my sort of 30s, 40s, I was international. So I did a lot of work in Asia, and the whole cross-cultural thing, it was new, and people were sent from Australia having never worked in another country or speaking another language to run an operation in, say, Indonesia or Malaysia or China, and they didn't have a clue, you know, let alone about emotional intelligence, cultural intelligence. So that's a big shift now. You know, our teams, organisations are more diverse. As Carissa was saying, you know, the generations coming through, they're tech savvy, they're collaborative mindsets, their co-creative nature. It's just how they vibe and function with a generation that's not really leading them now, that's not really savvy like that and having so. I think I still get disappointed. I still think, oh, wow, are we still back here as well? So it's not all, you know, lollipops and roses out there. There's things are changing, but the transition I still think is happening too slowly, personally. We use a lot of diagnostics. So say we're doing leadership development, often there's a diagnostic in there, like a 360 and a leadership diagnostic. The one I use a lot is looking at different leadership styles, and there's like a set of constructive styles, and then there's passive defensive and aggressive defensive styles. So they kind of get this circumplex. When people come in, how they see themselves, but then how their team see them. Different, and that can be a big wake up. We also know from the research that constructive styles, like, are you self-actualizing? Like, do you have self-awareness and personal growth? Are you coaching people? Do you have good relationships and you're about achievement? Builds for adaptability, well-being, satisfaction. Like, it all makes sense, but getting people off their old coping strategies. You know, when stress comes, do you default to power and dominance and being oppositional and perfectionistic, or do you go into avoidance and become really dependent and go for approval? Having that stuff. The tools often help people. You know, if they don't have self-awareness, it's kind of a starting point to go, oh, that's how I'm showing up. I didn't know that, and I didn't know that that's how people were seeing me and impact I'm having. Like, lights on, and then right, let's go. We can work with this, eh?
Yeah. And I feel like it's so valuable for you to come in and create that safety initially, because I feel like that could be quite a shock for some people and quite a lot for them to process, like emotionally, to go, like to have that kind of wake up call of like, oh, that's how I'm perceived. It can be really shocking when you have a particular perception of how you are, and then it gets shattered. And so it's so valuable that you're bringing in that level of safety from the beginning, because that gives them the space to actually be able to receive that type of feedback and growth, because otherwise we're closed off and we're defensive and we shut down because it can be too overwhelming.
Totally.
And I'm really curious with that younger generation. You talk about the tech savviness and the impactations of just that they've grown up in a totally different world. Are they more emotionally intelligent?
Oh, that's such a great question. Ooh. I think in some ways, yes, in their ability to collaborate. But I'm also seeing that unless the foundational work's done, as in self-regulation, probably not. So I would think maybe some of them are, but I would think we're human. They're all still human, and unless they've got those tools, and I'm not sure if they maybe are learning them at school, you know, with mindfulness and those processes, that's a life skill that they might take forward. But the younger generation that I know are still grappling with stress, high levels of distractibility, less able to hold in their attention. Not necessarily mental health is higher. You know, like what we're seeing coming through with mental health situations. Whether they're able to talk about it more, that the other generations, it wasn't such an openness thing. There was a lot of stigma around it. And this generation is like, there's no stigma, which is really good. I think there's different challenges, particularly around and I still think, emotional intelligence, particularly self-regulation, is kind of a life skill. Yeah.
Do you see the corporate structures shifting as emotional intelligence becomes more of a thing?
Some, I think, like in terms of working in the tech companies, I think that the agility, you know, the way that they create and solve problems, design new things, the way they work is very flexible and dynamic and collaborative, and that brings this style of leadership or team leadership into the space. Whereas when you've got more traditional like industries, like say construction, banking and finance, professional services are kind of in the middle of it all, slow. But I think tech is driving the more kind of innovative and dynamic the industry is, the more it's asking of leaders to change. Kind of agile leadership that's really popular. And a friend of mine, she works with one of the tech companies, and very much around, she would see herself as a leader of creative people, not a creative leader. And so that's her job. How do I create spaces for my people to just be dynamic and creative? I think it's funny. Go on. Sorry.
It's funny because, I mean, to me, that is creative leadership. Even if she considers herself to be the leader of creatives, I feel like the capacity to be creative with how to lead creative people is creative leadership.
And she kind of epitomizes that. But I was reading this book. His name is his name is David Markey, and his book's called Leadership is Language, which is really interesting. But he was on his journey to be the kind of to lead one of the best submarines in the US Navy, and his whole path changed. Like we were saying, life changes, and they put him in the worst performing one. And so he didn't understand anything about the technology of the submarine. Like he couldn't go in as the expert, which I think in the old model of leadership, I'm expert, I have authority, and I'll tell you what to do. He didn't know what he was dealing with. So he had to ask questions. He had to say, I don't know. Why don't we try? What do you think? And so his whole way of leadership completely changed. And he took that submarine from being the worst performing to the best. And he had things like, I wrote down a couple of things. He said, rather than convince, coerce, and conform, we collaborate have intent and commitment to action. So that's, rather than prove and perform, we improve and learn. Rather than vulnerability and certainty, it's vulnerability and curiosity. So his whole leadership was about, I love it. I thought, well, if you're going to get any hierarchy, you couldn't get more hierarchical than a naval submarine in a US, Navy, right? Talk about the masculine. Doing this amazing stuff with curiosity and emotional intelligence and vulnerability, and love it. I thought, yep, there we go. It can work there. It can work anywhere.
As you're speaking, what I'm receiving is curiosity is so key to self-awareness, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's that willingness to constantly open to what's next, what else is possible here, so that we can be even better than we already are. And as you said before, there's a natural humility that must go along with that curiosity.
Yeah.
When you have somebody come to you and they know they have to shift, what is first, like, from a leadership perspective, what are the first things that you work with this person to gain that level of self-awareness, to create curiosity and allow themselves to be humble in the process?
Lovely. I love your questions, both of you. Just fantastic. There's two different ways of coaching, right? There's one where we go in and look at the gaps and the problems, and the other way is to look at strengths, what's working and what we can grow. And my philosophy and orientation is around looking at that. So if we pull to the constructive styles as opposed to trying to fix the defensive patterns, we're going to get a lot more impact. So I will always start with, okay, let's look at what's working for you. What are your strengths? What matters to you? Help me understand who you are, what your values are. What are some of the things you're already doing that you know are working for you? And then let's add to that. So I really work with building that sense of trust, that someone's really safe and that they're not. Shame is that thing, isn't it? There's something really wrong with me. I'm stuffed. I'm the problem. And that's not where I go. It's kind of like, okay, we can work all these things can be developed. All these things can be grown and enhanced. We just need to develop some self-awareness about your backstory, like why this stuff's showing up. It's showing up for a reason, because you've developed over the years to cope. You probably learned it in your family. It was your coping strategy to stay safe as a kid in your family, and you've taken that forward. That's not so useful now as a leader. Let's work some strategies for when it shows up. How do you manage it? And that's the mindfulness piece that comes in, the self-awareness. So I start with this sense of, I see you, who you truly are, right? I think that's one of my gifts as a coach. When I work with someone, I just see them. You are a leader. You're this human being. And I see your potential. I see who you truly are, who you can be. I'm going to speak to that. And then let's look at all the things that might be getting in the way of that you are no longer useful. They're not right or wrong. They're just not useful. And if you want to do the work, we can shift some of this stuff. And my joy is working with people that want to self-actualize. They're like, okay, I want to grow. I want to change. I want to grow. Help me. Like, I'm going to do the work. I'm going to go and challenge. I'm going to shift my bound. I'm going to do it. I love it. It's just like, yes. You're my joy.
You love it. and
Favorite part of the year award.
When you were sharing then, I was reflecting on the conversation that we had with Gabby a few weeks ago before I went to Egypt, and we just released one of the little trailers for that the other day. And it's when you're talking about, you're seeing that person in their highest, that's really where it's at, isn't it? Is when we can meet each other in that place, the whole of reality shifts, because we're focusing on what's working and what is possible. And is simply you meeting that person in that place, no matter where they're at when they come in, they get this reflection of the highest version of themselves. And they get to, it might feel quite overwhelming at the start, especially if it's somebody who's not, who doesn't have a level of self-awareness, but there's an opportunity there for them to open. And I think that's the beautiful gift that I'm feeling when, you're going into these corporate environments and you're talking about banking and things like that, where there is a lot of density that still exists. And when you go in with this beautiful light that offers the opportunity, the environment, the reflection of non-judgment, things naturally shift without anyone having to do anything. And you then go, okay, where do we start? And so they naturally get to lead from the process. They get to lead the process. They get to lead themselves. And yeah, what a gift. I'm just going back to
that. Thank you. And I make them laugh. It's like, oh, it's all very serious right now. Or they say something, I go, well, that sucks, doesn't it? I mean, that really sucks. So it's the lightness, that sense that we talk about of frequency, that and I go, look, they're so-called negative emotions, but they're just denser emotions. They get our attention because they're denser, they're more intense, and we think that, they grab us more. And the lighter emotions are more subtle, like love and joy and peace. They're a higher frequency. So I help them understand that and why our brain. I help them try and understand their brain and make them laugh, like your brain's in the car and it's driving, it's really funky and this is what it's doing and it's not you. And so it's all this sense of you're the self, and around it you've got this brain and you've got this body and you've got, all these other parts, but there's you. We want you in the driver's seat. We don't want the rest of them. Even the parts work is fantastic, the internal family systems, to help people just understand that's not who you are. This amazing being with all this stuff going on. Get some space so you can be more of who you are. And I really think love is bringing love into the space always. And I think as women, wow, we just know how to do it. Know how to love someone. By the instant they walk in the room, you just wrap them in love and they just feel safe and feel loved. It's very underestimated, I think, in corporate, but it's coming more to the fore. And the Dr. Amen, he studied like 67,000 brains. Love him, Mr. Brain Doctor in America. He put the two brains up. He said, okay, just to sort this out, men and women's brains are completely different. He said, and there are two areas. I can't remember the second one. I have to have a look. Spatial awareness, and another one is the masculine brain is a larger part in the brain. But he said the rest, women are the ones that should be in leadership because of the way our brains are configured and what we can hold. And I know that's probably completely inappropriate to say, but he said it, and he's the brain guy, and he scanned 67,000 brains. And I'm going, yes.
I think one of the things as well is that there's more flexibility between the hemispheres of the brain in the female, isn't there? And so we are more suited to those elements of leadership because there's a greater scope for flexibility.
Yes. Flexibility, openness, curiosity, all of that. Yes. And access our emotional selves. But that comes back to our ability to regulate as well. We're not hijacked by it, that we can use it, powerfully. Yeah.
So interesting. I can't help but think about the fact, like, of the time that we're in this week when it comes to leadership and the, what's happening in the US with the election and everything like that, and thinking about how the perspectives of leadership and how I believe as a society we are leaning away from the control and dominance style. And I think, you know, for me, I think that's why Trump won, because he is talking about how he wants to break down the dominance and the control and give more freedom. And, you know, right or wrong, good or bad, like his personality, whatever, what you believe. But just from a collective perspective, I think that that is why, and because of that particular piece. And even though the other side was a woman and he is a man, I think from that overarching hierarchical perspective, the messaging that seems to be coming from there is like, let's break down the limitation of free speech and the dominance and control. And so it's really interesting, just as I mean, it's been in my awareness this whole conversation, but when you spoke about the women in leadership, I thought, oh, that's so interesting, because obviously, you know, we had an option of a woman, but that particular woman was also offering very, or that side was offering a lot of limitations to what people have the freedom for talking about and things like that. So it's really interesting, this thing that's happening in our reality right now that is offering us some perspectives on leadership that are just really get the popcorn out. It's just so interesting to watch. And I know it's really scary for people. And there's also this really interesting thing that's changing in our society at the moment around leadership.
I love that piece that you just brought in, Carissa, because what it's doing is it's an invitation to, you know, have this awareness of between the male and the female, but actually come out and take an eagle-eye view of what's actually going on, because it's not necessarily about the man or the woman. And again, come back to everything that Sally's been talking about, which is self-awareness. And this aspect of what we're being invited into is an opportunity for every single one of us to go, what do I personally believe, which then influences my ability to lead myself. And then where do I resonate here? And again, continuing to move out, because we don't want to take sides. We want to actually be in this body and this level of self-awareness, sovereignty within ourselves. And I feel what you just spoke about then is this is the invitation here, is to watch what's happening out there. And as a leader, as somebody who's leading ourselves and therefore a team, we then get to invite those people into the same place of like, okay, I'm asking myself these questions about what's okay for me, what's right for me. And therefore I'm going to go into that space, and I'm going to have more capacity to create space for you to do the same, and not try to place some top-down structures on you that don't work anymore. Let's have more of a conversation. So it's like extracting out of the story and then coming to this space and then going back in and going, rightio, here's an opportunity for you now to extract as a leader. And the more that our leaders come into that space of self-awareness, the greater our capacity to do that as a collective.
Totally. Yeah. And I feel like the first time that my thoughts went there was when you said, Sally, about how important it is for a leader to have self-leadership. And I think as a society at the moment, it's being highlighted to us where we place our leadership, our sovereignty, our freedom, our power outside of ourselves, and how the impactations that this election is having on people is this sense of loss of a lot of those things. And I think, you know, in the polarization and the way that we work in our evolution is that we often have to swing from one side to the other side to find this place in the middle. And I think at the moment we're swinging to like this perception that the leadership is outside of ourselves, that the sovereignty is outside of ourselves, that the freedom is impacted by government, not by self, and that I choose my freedom and that I choose my sovereignty. And don't get me wrong, you know, a lot of the issues and things that are going to impact society are really important. And if we all bring it back to that really basic self level, then those things start to shift and change as a result of that, as opposed to the opposite, where we get this impactation from external and then we try and find our way out of it. If we start here and move out, the impact can be so much greater and the ripple effect in society is greater. And so I love that where you started around like the impact of a leader starts with their self-leadership, because I think that's what we're learning as a greater collective at the moment. And some of us have been learning that for a really long time. And I think some of us are learning that at the moment and completely unconscious to it and really unaware. And that self-awareness, I think we are getting slapped around the face to have as many people wake up right now as possible.
I think leadership is an inside job. Ramesh Hargud, he said that in his book, Mind of a Leader. They looked at 30,000 leaders across 100 countries. That's a lot of leaders. And the foundational skills for leadership, 3. 1, mindfulness. 2, self-awareness. 3, self-compassion. And so it was like that ability to be mindful, have humility, have compassion for self and others. That is kind of like foundational. So I think you're right. Our brain, isn't it? Our stress brain will take us out, and we will go into survival, and we'll exit ourselves unless we've got those tools and ability to come back and ground and center and breathe, and then go and pause and go, what choice do I want to make now? Rather than reacting, I'm noticing. I'm just going to pause, and then I'm going to make a choice, and I'm going to move towards values, or I'm going to move towards an action, inspired action around intention. If we don't have that ability, as you said, we're just knocked around. And yeah, there are things we can all learn, but our emotional brain is still so strong. You know, that evolutionary part of us that drives our sense of safety and survival. And when there's uncertainty, we can default there because we don't feel safe, and the brain doesn't feel safe. So all of these things are about how do we keep our center? As you said, how do we come back? Leadership is an inside job. Start here. Best, as you said, ripples out and affects, and even the heart math stuff, isn't it? That our emotions go out 360 degrees around us as a frequency that's carried in our field. So if a leader's feeling anxious or frustrated or angry or whatever, and they walk through the office, or someone comes to sit in their office, that field embraces the other person, and their emotional self and their coherence starts to be affected. So their state will affect everything. And just that realization that no, you can't hide what's going on the inside, because everything is showing on the outside energetically, and it's just having this massive impact, even non-verbally, let alone that, non-verbals and your energetic self. So I agree with what you're saying. It's like, yeah, you got it, this bit.
Yeah,
it just highlights again the importance of that internal piece, because there is so much uncertainty right now, and there are a lot of people that are like quite seriously affected by that uncertainty. And the more that internal structural scaffolding is built, then the uncertainty that's external doesn't have us wobble.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's kind of what you've been saying this whole time, is this, the more we build that scaffolding where we can hold ourselves in the face of uncertainty or anything, and the emotional resilience that we have in the face of things that make us wobble is what makes us as individuals great leaders, but also like as a society, it's going to make a really big impact again. Yeah.
And when Sal was speaking then, it was the visual for me of the most powerful energetic is the one that influences the field. And so when somebody does have that internal scaffolding that is strong, what they are emanating from within is really powerful, and that actually has the ability to influence everyone around them. And so it's our task of self-leadership is to come into this place, which is exactly, go back to what you've been talking about, Sally, go back to this level of self-awareness. What's going on inside of me? How am I feeling about it? Am I trying to get away from these uncomfortable emotions? And what do I need to do to bring myself back to center so that I can emanate the frequency that I want to emanate, rather than getting pulled into someone else's?
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. And then we wrap around that things like, is my nutrition good? Am I getting good sleep? Am I exercise? So the physical body, like we take care of that. So the emotional body is more regulated as well. Mentally, what am I doing? How am I managing my screen time and what I'm paying attention to and what I'm listening to? Am I listening to the news every night when I drive home from work? And then spiritually, what am I connected to beyond myself? Like, who am I? Like, I think, like, for me, it's physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, and the emotional tools are really, really important. And then the others are supportive processes. So, yeah, it's holistic, isn't it?
Yeah, and all of them feed and support one another. We kind of talked about this a little bit in our podcast with Kerry, and how the different layers of the body, and it's really hard to have emotional stability when you don't have physical health. Like, if your physical health and your nutrition is a bit messed up, then the hormones and all the precursors to all of the electrical actions that are happening in your body are a little bit off. And so you can be as emotionally self-aware as you possibly can be. And if your body is not working in the way that it's designed to, because there's, nutrition and things like that are off, then like they have to be together. We can't treat them as these two separate things. And I with someone from someone who has studied nutrition, and Kirsty with her naturopathy, we have that total agreement with the physical body, but all of them, like you said, the layers, they all have to be considered and brought into greater health in all layers. Yeah, I love that. I love that you're bringing that into the corporate space. I just think it's fabulous. Yeah.
First question for a woman in her late 30s, 40s, and she's telling me she doesn't feel okay. I go, is it okay if I ask you a personal question? How are your hormones? Have, what's going on there? Have you been tested? Like, where are you on your journey? Oh, like, you could be in perimenopause, and a lot of what you're feeling could be hormonal. Let's get the foundations. Let's look there. So, yeah.
Because people don't know. They haven't been taught.
No.
And the more that we find out, the more we realize how much we weren't.
Oh my God, I wish I knew. Oh my goodness. So much now that we know that we didn't know. Oh, it's just like fantastic. And I'm like, oh, I wish I knew that. But anyway, I can help the next generation for sure.
Yeah. And also, when we realize, we can bring it back to simplicity, because the way that we've been taught is to make everything so complex. And actually, when we bring it back to begin those initial steps of self-leadership, it can be so simple, can't it? Like, I remember talking to a friend of mine who was a dietitian once in the hospital, and I said to her, how do you talk to these people? And she said, sometimes somebody will come in and they've got all of these health problems on, and I'll ask them what they eat, and then she says that the outcome of the consultation is that I tell them to eat a cucumber. To go and eat some salad. And simple steps like that. It's just they don't know, because they've taught themselves out of it because of the way that we've lived our lives in this state of complexity. And I just think it's, again, I'm just going to go back to it, it's such a gift that you're offering to these people in the corporate space, because I think the intention in that space is to create complexity, which takes away from the individual level of sovereignty, and bringing that back to offering that to come back for people is so incredibly powerful, which will naturally, I guess, change the structure of how that world operates, won't it?
Yeah, thank you for that. If I circle right back to when we started, Donna Eden, like, simple, like you said, simple, that some of her techniques for helping someone ground, balance, take care of their energy. Like the 5-minute daily routine is, I was up on Zoom the other day. I was talking to a client. She's about to do a presentation, and there was a lot of anxiety. I said, "Okay, I just want to show you a couple of things. I'm just going to stand back there, and we're going to zip up and hook up, and you're going to do like I want you to do this, right? Or a weave." And it's like simple. It's simple, but it's so impactful. So if someone can eat a cucumber in a salad, or they might do a Donna Eden energy routine, or sit down and just do some breathing, or like Carissa does, take your shoes off and go stand on the lawn, or outside and look at the sky. Like, it doesn't have to be complex. It really works. Yeah, that's what I'm about. Yeah, what works, what's useful, keep it simple, and wrap it with love. And humor.
Totally. Yeah. Beautiful.
Well, I guess for me to close, I would just love to say that if there's anyone that who is listening to this podcast, and you know anyone in the corporate world that is looking for somebody who wants to work with their leadership, both of us, Carissa and I, know like Sally's so fun and so dynamic, and I'm sure that she would make a massive difference to the organization. So if you want to put them in touch with Sally, and I'm sure that their life will change as will the company that becomes involved. I'm really grateful, and I feel blessed to have you in my orbit, Sally. And I'm really grateful that you've said yes to joining us here today, and that we've been able to have this conversation, especially at this time in our humanity.
Yeah, thank you both. It was such a lovely conversation. And in the corporate work, I would never drop in without some prep, right? It's like, okay, I'm just going to go with this. The only thing I wrote down was David Marquis stuff. I thought, oh, that's really good. But I thought, we'll just see how this unfolds. It's been such a lovely conversation. Thank you for the questions and beautiful energy. Love you both and really enjoyed it.
Thanks, honey. Love you.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us.
Lots of love.